The Daily Derech. We are walking the path of holiness.
Hello, everybody. This is Rabbi Marcus Rubenstein. Welcome to the Daily Derech, a special project of exploring Judaism, the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism, the Rabbinical Assembly, and Temple of Aaron. Today is the fourth day after Shabbat Kodesh, the 22nd of Av, 5786, corresponding in the secular calendar to Wednesday, August 5th, 2026. We will read Parashat Re'eh this coming Shabbat. Let's begin. Parashah. We'll continue learning Parashat Re'eh today. We are in the fourth Aliyah. The fourth Aliyah, this year, is chapter 12, verses 11 through 16. They go like this. Then you must bring everything that I command you to the site where the Eternal your God will choose to establish the divine name. Your burnt offerings and other sacrifices, your tithes and contributions, and all the choice votive offerings that you vow to God. And you shall rejoice before the Eternal your God with your sons and daughters, and with your male and female slaves, along with the Levite in your settlements, for he has no territorial allotment among you. Take care not to sacrifice your burnt offerings in any place you like, but only in the place that God will choose in one of your tribal territories. There you shall sacrifice your burnt offerings, and there you shall observe all that I enjoin upon you. But whenever you desire, you may slaughter and eat meat in any of your settlements, according to the blessing that the Eternal your God has granted you. The impure and the pure alike may partake of it, as of the gazelle and the deer, but you must not partake of the blood. You shall pour it on the ground like water. All right, a lot in these verses. I'm going to quickly try to summarize what's talked about here. Number one, the theme continues that uniquely now we're going to be sacrificing and bringing offerings and tithes and everything to one particular place that's not actually named in the parsha yet, or it won't be named, but in one particular place. We hear that it's in one particular tribe settlement. Everyone will go there. We also hear that we are also obligated to rejoice not just with the slaves amongst our houses. People had slaves back then, mostly, again, wage slaves. So a little different, but still. And also the Levites, those who are underprivileged. And we'll talk about that more in just a second. There's also this idea that is mentioned here that specifically that actually you may be able to eat meat whenever you like. In any of your settlements, and you won't have to sacrifice this. This is the idea that before entering the land of Israel, actually the meat would have to be sacrificed and offered to in your settlements in order to actually eat of it. So in order to eat meat, there would have to be a sacrifice. Now that there is a prohibition on making earth altars and making sacrifices outside of that one particular place, which we know eventually will be Jerusalem and the Beit HaMikdash, the temple, we now are allowed to eat meat within our settlements. So very different than before. Just an important warning, right? We still can't eat the blood, right? There's a specific prohibition never to eat the blood of an animal. And so therefore, we must make sure to remove the water. Obviously, this must be done. This usually is done today with the process of soaking and salting meat, but still is pointed out specifically in verse 16 here. The sort of idea I want to bring to the deeper idea that actually I brought from was brought in Me'am Loez, was specifically in this idea about the Levites and the slaves, and that we have to rejoice with them. The Me'am Loez brings a particular idea that inspired me today, is that many people, when at least the Me'am Loez says this, when a poor person is brought into their house to have a meal, they sort of eat at the end of the table on the side. They're not really brought into the family. They're not sitting at the table. They sort of are sitting on the side, or sort of given food as, we'll have mercy on this person. But at least the way the Me'am Loez reads this is actually that is not what this mitzvah is commanding, because the language says along with the Levites in your settlements, right? And if you actually look inside the Torah here, it doesn't just say alongside, or it's funny. It's like in English again, it's a little different. But verse 12, it actually says usmachtem lifnei Hashem. You should be joyous before God, right, with them, right? So specifically, right, that you have to have it. That you have to actually be together with them. And so the point that's made within the Me'am Loez is that this verse is hinting at this idea that you need to have them be those who are poor and needy need to be sitting at the table with you. They need to be part of your family and not some sort of side thing that we just have compassion on. Actually, the Me'am Loez says that actually this can become a transgression when we make them feel less than, when we treat them not as part of the family, when we are doing this act of charity, when we're doing this act of love, to have them actually eat with us. Mishnah Torah. We'll continue on learning the laws of prayer today. We are going to be learning actually a bunch of different halacha. We're in chapter 3. We're going to learn 8 through 11 today. We have a lot to get through, and that's because I really just wanted to cover this section in one particular episode, and so we'll try to move quickly. And this is the idea of what happens when we unintentionally miss an Amidah, right? When we miss I think this happens to everyone who tries to pray 3 times a day. There's going to be times when you don't make it, when you mess up. Is it sort of lost and like, oh, we've transgressed, we have to ask for tshuva from God for missing this Amidah, or is there something we can do about it? And according to the halacha, according to the Mishnah Torah, there's something we can actually do. And I don't think a lot of people know about this, so it's actually good to explain it clearly here. So halacha 8 begins. Anyone who intentionally allowed the proper time to prayer to pass without praying cannot rectify the situation and cannot compensate for this failure to pray. So again, if you intentionally miss the prayer, you just decide you don't want to pray today or don't pray this particular service, there's actually no way of making it up. We can never make up that time once the time has passed. But if he unintentionally failed to pray or was unavoidably detained or distracted, he can compensate for the missed prayer during the time of prayer closest to it. He should first recite the prayer of this time and afterward the prayer of compensation. And this is called tashlumin in Hebrew. The idea that you first pray the Amidah. So let's say you miss Shachrit and now it's Mincha, right? So you pray the Mincha Amidah just as normal, but afterwards you pray a second Amidah, and that's considered compensation, Tashlumin, for the Shachrit prayer. Only when you unintentionally miss this. This does not have to do with purposeful missing, unless you're sort of unavoidable or you're distracted, detained with some other matter. Halacha 9, how is this exemplified? So he now kind of explains this more. One who errs and does not recite the morning prayer before half the day passes should recite the mincha prayer twice, the first as mincha itself, and the second as compensation for the morning prayer, just what I said. One who errs and does not recite the mincha prayer before sunset should recite the evening prayer twice, the first as the evening prayer itself, and the second as compensation for the mincha prayer. So again, same thing, you miss mincha, right? You can compensate it after the evening prayer by repeating a second Amidah during Ma'ariv. Similarly, one who errs and does not recite the evening prayer before dawn should recite the morning prayer twice, the first as the morning prayer itself, and the second as compensation for the evening prayer. So you don't recite Ma'ariv. The next Amidah, which would be the morning Amidah the next day, you can then recite it a second Amidah for the Amidah of Aravit that you missed. Halacha 10. One who errs and does not recite 2 consecutive prayers can only compensate for the last of them. So this only works, again, if you only miss one prayer. You can't compensate for more than one Amidah at a time. So how is this exemplified? One who errs and recites neither the morning prayer nor the mincha prayer should recite the evening prayer twice. The first is the evening prayer itself, and the last is compensation for mincha. The morning prayer, however, has no compensation since its time has already passed. This is also the case for other prayers. So very important, right? You can only do this for missing one. Right, you cannot do this for missing multiple prayers. I think the idea probably here is it just gets too long, and it's too much time has passed, and so you need to do this in the next Amidah that you have. So really, there is a time constraint. So really, something that is important to do. Musar. We're going to now turn back to Menorat HaMaor again. We are now going to continue to speak about Dibor, and I think we will move on from Shari Tshuva. I was kind of floundering between these two texts, and I think we're going to go back to Menorat HaMaor. It's just a text I find to be more balanced, and Shari Tshuva is just so intense, and I think Menorat HaMaor just fits our our perspective more. And I just always want to come back to that text. I always love this sefer. So we've been talking about, when we've been last learning Menorat HaMaor, we've been talking about Dibor on the section of how we speak and things we should think about when we speak, how to become better at speaking, and according to Torah and Judaism. And we've been talking about this idea that the ability to speak is extremely precious, and that we should only use our mouths for what it's meant for. We talked about the idea, just as a review, that this is things specifically for getting what we need physically, right? Money, and food, clothing, shelter, everything like this. And then also for spiritual things like studying Torah, praying, and things like this as well. And so we really should try as best we can to only really use it for things that are necessary, that we really need, whether for physical or spiritual needs. And so he continues here. And even more fitting is this for a human being who possesses intellect, which his creator has given him so that he may choose the good and reject the evil, right? So he's saying here that this is specifically sort of the place in which often we choose between the good and the evil, and that we're able to do this uniquely as human beings because God has given us seichel. God has given us intellect from able to decide whether to do good or to do evil, which so often happens in our speech. Such a person ought to sanctify his mouth and separate it from idle speech, and certainly from forbidden speech. Right? God has given us the capability from deciding between good speech and bad speech. God didn't take away from us the capability from doing bad and speaking bad speech, like God often does this with an animal. Just doesn't give them the possibility, the ability to even do what God doesn't want of them. But as human beings, we uniquely have the possibility for doing what God doesn't want of us, right? God sort of gives us the freedom. Why? Because we have that intellect, we have that seichel, and so we're supposed to use it when we speak, especially because we should try, by sanctifying our mouths, to not speak idle speech, meaning speech that's not for either a physical or spiritual purpose, but is sort of just neutral, right? That's kind of dangerous. We could fall into transgression in that way. The more we speak, the more probability we might actually say something transgressive or dangerous or harmful. So generally, we try to watch our idle speech, but obviously, more importantly, to stay away from forbidden speech, right? That's the main way in which we sanctify our mouths. With the mouth that was created for holy speech, one should not utter empty words, right? And ideally, like, our mouth was created for holy speech. We shouldn't say idle things, not just forbidden speech, but like also idle things that aren't very holy. And this comes from a teaching in the Gemara from Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, very famous teaching. He said, "If I had been at Mount Sinai, I would have requested 2 mouths." So what he's saying here, right, is if God was able to, if Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was able to speak to Hashem and ask him for a particular thing, he would have said, if you expect this mouth to actually learn Torah and teach it, right, then you should give me 2 mouths, because it would be better for me just to use one mouth and make it holy for speaking words of wisdom, and not be able to use and then to use another mouth to speak vanities of this world, right? To speak things that aren't as important. It's hard to kind of understand whether this is about the required things he was talking about, like food, shelter, everything like this, or just like idle speech. It's a little bit hard to tell. I need Sri Chayun, as they say. We need a little bit more understanding to see what he really means here. But regardless, I think it still works to say it would have been better to have 2 mouths, but we don't. We only have one mouth that we can use for holy speech, and also for the basic necessities of this world, food, shelter, to keep our bodies. And so certainly we should not use that same mouth to speak vanities of this world in order to sanctify it. And I think it's a beautiful idea. Like, how do we treasure this one mouth, this one tongue, this one capability that we've been given? We don't have multiple mouths. We don't have multiple tongues. How do we sanctify this body part, this thing that defines us as human being, by using our seichel, by using our intelligence, our logic, to try to speak only words that are required, that really are needed, and holy words as well, whether both spiritually or physically, and trying to stay away from idle speech, things that aren't required in that way. Well, that's it for today, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Daily Derech. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to email me anytime at rmr@templeofaaron.org. thank you so much for listening. There are so many people to thank, and you can look in the show notes for that. And also, if you want to know and see any of these texts in the original, we actually have that too. You can actually find that in our episode description. So look in each of the episode descriptions and you'll find that information right there. Thank you very much. Have a great day, everybody.